Hello and welcome to tonight's lecture, announced by the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies in partnership with Usul Academy. I'm your host, Naeem Mahmoud. Tonight, we are to have the fifth lecture on the series, Decolonizing Social Science from Uniplexity to Multiplexity. This is a 7-part lecture series that is taking part on a fortnightly basis. The series aims to understand contemporary social science in the light of faith. Tonight, the title of tonight's lecture is Multiplex Human Ontology, and the lecturer is Professor Dr. Recep Şentürk. He is a very distinguished scholar in this field. Professor Şentürk is a professor of sociology at the Ibn Khaldun University. He served as the founding president of Ibn Khaldun University from 2017 to 2021. He was a researcher at the Center for Islamic Studies, ISAM, in Istanbul, and founding director of Alliance of Civilizations Institute. He is the head of International Ibn Khaldun Society. He published widely in English, Arabic, and Turkish on a whole range of topics, including social theory and methods, civilization, modernization, sociology of religion, networks of hadith transmission, Malcolm X, Islam and human rights, modern Turkish thoughts, and Ibn Khaldun. He also authorized several books that have been translated into Arabic, Japanese, and Spanish. So this is the few words about intro of tonight's lecture. Next, we'll go straight to the lecture, and the lecture will last around 30 to 45 minutes. And then the lecture will be followed by Q&A section, which will last around 30 to 45 minutes as well. We follow some housekeeping rules. Just to let you know, we ask our audience to keep mic and mobile muted until told otherwise. We encourage discussion and debate, maintaining professional approach. We also encourage attendees to take notes on the lecture for the comments and Q&A section. Now, without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Dr. Recep Şentürk to deliver the lecture. Professor, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay. I hope you see my screen.
Yeah, you see very nice.
Okay, very good. All right. My dear friends, I wish all of you good night. You know, those who live in Europe and the West. So today I will be talking about multiplex human ontology as part of the series of decolonizing social sciences, and I believe that because social science is about human beings and their actions, human ontology plays a very key role when it comes to building a paradigm for social sciences. Every social theory is based on a particular concept of human ontology. What's a human being? You know, what kind of existence human beings have? You know, what kind of being a human? So these questions constitute very fundamental foundation for social theory, and every social theory, with no exception, is based on a conception of human being. But sometimes this is like on the background, and people don't question it. However, one should always keep in mind that when people say human being, they always mean different things. Like materialists have a different concept of human being, idealists have a different concept of human being. You know, Muslim philosophers, scholars, they have a different concept of human being. Hindus, Buddhists, they all have different concept of human beings. Or the fact that they use the same name should not mislead us to think that they all mean the same thing. For this reason, if you want to critically and comparatively analyze social theories, you have to pay attention to what kind of human ontology they use, what kind of human ontology provides the foundation for the theory of human action and society. So man's effort to know who he is or she is a very long quest. I mean, it predates, to the beginning of history. A good example to this is this anecdote from Plato. When Plato, in one of his lectures, defined man as a feederless bipeds, Diogenes plucked a chicken and brought it into Plato's academy and said, "I brought you a man." Plato then added, a man is a feederless biped with broad, flat nails, to his definition. Of course, this is a very simple definition, and it may look very awkward to you. However, this demonstrates that how difficult it is to define a man, a human being. Although you may expect that it should be the most simple and straightforward thing, to define, who or what a human being is, but you see, it's a very complicated issue. Are we really featherless bipeds with broad, flat nails, or, as Nietzsche said, the red-faced animal? Are we like machines, as Julian Offray believes, or, as Foucault argued, nothing in man, not even his body, is sufficiently stable to serve as the basis for self-recognition or for understanding other men? So this is a puzzling question. Alexis Carrel, a French surgeon and biologist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1912, in his well-known book, Man, the Unknown, which is published in 1935, makes the claim that the man, in fact, largely remains unknown. And it continues until today. He draws attention to the strange disparity between the sciences of matter, such as astronomy, mechanics, and physics, and those of life, and especially of the human individual. According to him, the sciences of life, such as social sciences, have progressed more slowly than those of inert matter. And this is due to our ignorance of ourselves. So he wrote that we are very far from knowing what relations exist between skeleton, muscles, and organs, and mental and spiritual activities. And he continues to say, a materialist and a spiritualist accept the same definition of a crystal of sodium chloride, but they don't agree with one another upon that of the human being. So this is the disparity he's complaining. So why is the knowledge of ourselves so important? Every theory in social sciences is grounded upon a certain conception of human being or the self. Since the subject matter of social science is the human being and his actions, all scientific disciplines have to make some assumptions about man and his behavior. Ingalls wrote that while most sociologists make their model of society explicit, their view of man is more often only implicit. Nevertheless, that implicit conception exercises at least a great influence on their work. However, because of the ambiguity, they prefer to keep it implicit and in the background. How we understand the self determines how we explain, understand, and regulate human behavior. So everything is grounded on the concept of the self and human being, explanation, understanding, and regulations. Islam as a religion and Islamic tradition, namely Kalam, Fiqh, and Tasawwuf, embrace a multiplex conception of the self. I will explain later what I mean by the multiplex conception of the self. Actually, this presentation is about the explanation of this multiplex conception of the self. By taking on the multiplex understanding of the self and theory of action, we can come up alternative social, economic, and political theories. That's why it's very significant, to understand what's multiplex conception of the self, because this would make possible to come up with alternative theories about human action, social and political theories. How do we know who we are? For some scholars, we can discover ourselves only through empirical methods. For others, it's possible by utilizing the insights of other sources, such as sacred texts, intuition, and wisdom of great scholars. Derek Phillips, an American historian and sociologist, wrote, "Whether they admit it or not, sociologists, like all men, view the behavior of themselves and others in terms of certain assumptions about men, about society, and about men in interaction with one another." So these are assumptions. They're not proven. This means that sociologists will organize their research and their writings in terms of such prior assumptions. They are not empirical facts. They are assumptions. It could not, of course, be otherwise. For like those whom he studies and writes about, the sociologist is influenced by his own experiences. Some sociologists undoubtedly will argue that they make no assumptions about men and society, or their assumptions are supported by empirical evidence. In my view, this is hogwash. Little of what we think we know about the nature of man and society is based on empirical evidence. So today, if you survey the social science, humanities, and philosophy literature, you will see that there are mainly three different understanding of human being, three different concept of self. First, the classical multiplex concept of human being. So from this perspective, man is both a physical and metaphysical being. So a person is constituted by body, mind, and soul. And the other commonly used concept of self is the modern monist or dualist, because modern conception of self has two types. Either it is assumed that a person is a physical being constituted only by body, or as Descartes argued, a man is constituted by body and mind. So a person has physical and metaphysical being. So this is called the dualist perspective. So modern social scientists and philosophers, they either accept the monist view or the dualist view. But the problem here is that they reduce soul to mind. So that's the difference between the multiplex and the dualist perspectives. Multiplex perspective separates the soul as a different entity. And the postmodernists, they're anti-essentialist. And the best representative of the postmodern anti-essentialist position is Foucault. So he wrote, "Nothing in man, not even his body, is sufficiently stable to serve as the basis for self-recognition or for understanding other men." So basically, he's saying that we cannot know ourselves because there is nothing stable. Everything is fluid in a human being, including the body. So this very radical statement. It is aimed against the modern monist or dualist positions. So the concept of self in modern social sciences, the type of the self that modern social science assume may be described as an nafs al-ammara from an Islamic perspective. So an nafs al-ammara is a self which is completely governed by instinctual desires or hedonistic desires. because they assume that an-nafs al-ammara is human nature. Hedonistic desires and instincts is human nature, but as I will explain later, we don't accept people at the level of an-nafs al-ammara as natural. We think this needs to be educated and left behind. For instance, Homo economicus, is a justification of an-nafs al-ammara, and it accepts people at the level of nafs al-ammara as natural because they accept that Homo economicus has endless needs. And nafs al-ammara has endless desires. Human beings have limited needs. So again, Thomas Hobbes said homo homini lupus, which means a man is a wolf to another man. So this aggressiveness. So he thought this is human nature. And David Hume said reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. Again, this is nafs ammara. So passions must rule and reason must be subdued to serve the passions. So today we can make a classification that there are absolutely deterministic perspective on human nature, whether good or evil, or as Foucault argues, there is nothing determined in human beings, and completely against this determinist perspective, anti-essentialist, or the Islamic view, which is in between. From that perspective, human nature is not fixed at birth. The human beings have the potential and inclination to go either way. Under-programmed, under-determined. They have fitra, and fitra means, human beings have inclination to go either the good way or the wrong way, but they have a stronger inclination to go the good way. So fitra doesn't mean like a predetermined human being. Fitra means having both inclinations, but more inclination, stronger inclination to go the good direction. That's the meaning of fitra. So you see that today we have three concept of self. From one perspective is absolutely determined. From another perspective, the postmodern perspective, nothing is determined. Nothing is essential, nothing is permanent, nothing is stable. And then the Islamic approach with a view that human beings have potential inclination to go either way. Why do economists think that normal human behavior is selfish? This Homo economicus, a human being with endless needs and selfish and trying to maximize his profit. An answer given by Asad Zaman, Professor Asad Zaman, to this question. He wrote that the answer is deep, complex, and lengthy, and requires a study of how European thought changed during the process of the Great Transformation, when European intellectuals abandoned Christianity and created a secular society. Here we can summarize these ideas very briefly by saying that loss of faith in God is a very serious and traumatic event which affects all our thought process and actions. In particular, if there is no God and no hereafter, then actions based on generosity and self-sacrifice don't seem to make much sense. There is no one watching, appreciating, and no reward will be given later for such actions. Therefore, it seems natural to say the rational behavior is selfish. That's intelligent people who understand that there is no God and no hereafter should only focus on their own needs and completely disregard others. Thus, this theory of selfish behavior emerges from the European historical background when Europeans lost faith in the hereafter and decided that the goal of life must be to enjoy paradise. luxuries, comforts, and wealth in the here and now. This idea is embodied in the heart of economic theory. All rational human beings try to maximize the lifetime pleasure, which they call utility, that they get from consumption of goods and services. So you see how this concept of self is redefined during this great transformation when Europeans moved, from Christian understanding of self to the secular materialist understanding of self. And then they made it the foundation of economic theory, which they call Homo economicus. So now let's move to the multiplex human ontology. We have already discussed in the previous lectures that Islamic worldview is based on multiplex ontology, which includes material world, non-material world, and the divine world, or in Arabic, mulk, melekut, and lahut. So this multiplex approach to the whole world is reflected on the human ontology as well. So a human being is accepted to have three levels: body, mind, and soul. So it's very important here to pay attention to the separation of the mind and soul, because mind is the functions of the brain. It may be subject for the study of neuroscience or psychology using empirical methods, but soul is above mind. It belongs to the metaphysical level of existence. So it's a metaphysical entity. So this is what I call multiplex human ontology. And the soul is something that has two faculties. Most importantly, reason and nafs, akıl and nafs, akıl and nafs. But soul is sometimes called ruh, sometimes called qalb, and sometimes it's even called nafs. Sometimes, so the spiritual heart, the soul, the spirit, you have to pay attention to the context to precisely understand what's meant when this term is used. So the soul has two faculties, akıl and nafs. Akıl is easy to translate to English, reason, intellect, easy. But when it comes to translating nafs, very difficult, because such a concept does not exist in Western human ontology. That's why it's not easy to translate nafs to English. Sometimes it's translated as hedonistic self, sometimes ego, sometimes appetitive self. Different terms are used for it. So here I use the hedonistic self. Hedonistic means someone who's running after pleasure, making pleasure the ultimate goal of life. So there is a conflict in the soul between reason and hedonistic self, or in Arabic, between akıl and nafs. So these are the two faculties of the soul, and human character, human attributes, and human action is an outcome of this dialectic in our inner life, the conflict between our reason and our hedonistic self or ego or appetites, determines what we do, the way we act. So in social sciences, there is a problem called body and mind problem. There are three major approaches to this problem: the Cartesian perspective. From the Cartesian perspective, body and mind, these are two separate categories that make up the human being. They are two separate categories. And from the physicalist perspective, mind is not a metaphysical entity. It's material and secondary to the physical body. And from idealist perspective, mind is primary in human existence. So Colin McGinn, wrote, "We have been trying for a long time to solve the mind-body problem. It has stubbornly resisted our best efforts. The mystery persists. I think the time has come to admit candidly that we cannot resolve the mystery. But I also think that this is very insolubility, or the reason for it removes the philosophical problem. So let's not bother with it." This is what's recommended. Can we think of another way out? Let's have a closer look at multiplex human ontology and see whether the relationship between mind and body constitute a problem or not. Multiplex human ontology, I think the best way to solve this body and mind dichotomy, it's a false dichotomy, it's a false binary in the Western thought. So from this perspective, human beings have a physical body like animals. The body is controlled by the metaphysical soul. The ultimate control center of a human being is the soul, which is also called the heart, qalb. Ruh and qalb, sometimes they are used synonymously, but sometimes qalb refers to a faculty within the soul. So in Arabic, there is a nice poem, يا خادم الجسم كم تشقى بخدمته أتطلب الربح فيما فيه خسران أقبل على النفس واستكمل فضائلها فأنت بالنفس لا بالجسم إنسان. So the poet reminds that you are with your soul a human being. You are not a human being because of your body, because all animals also have their bodies. So this is not what distinguishes you from the other creatures. What distinguishes you from other creatures is your soul. So don't be servant of your body, because this would be a loss. So focus your attention on your soul and try to nurture the virtues of your soul. Body limbs are servants of the soul because they get commands from the soul and act accordingly. There is a two-way communication between the body and the soul. Bodily needs are also communicated to the soul. The physical heart and brain are the intermediaries between body and soul. So you see in this graph that we have a soul at the top, and the soul controls the mind, and the mind controls the physical heart and the brain and the body. But there is a two-way communication. So data collected by the body is transferred to the mind, and through the mind to the soul. And the same way, the commands after the interpretation of the data collected by the body is given to the mind, and through the brain, the commands is transferred to the body, and the body acts accordingly. So our actions are co-production or joint production of our soul, mind, and body. So three of them work together to produce an action. What is the mind? According to Al-Ghazali, the soul connects to the body through the brain, and he calls brain dimag, which is also called dhihn, mind. So brain refers to the physical infrastructure, and the dhihn, mind, refers to the operations of the brain. Mind is the emerging qualities and functions of the brain. So the commands for action reflecting the human will to act in a particular way comes from the soul and conveyed to the mind. But information collected by the senses and biological needs and desires of the body are first conveyed to the mind, and from the mind to the soul. So the communication is constant both ways. So we have 5 external and internal senses of the mind. The mind with its 5 external and 5 internal senses is one of the soldiers of the metaphysical soul, spiritual heart, and is placed in the brain. So this is what Imam Ghazali says in his Ihya Ulumuddin. So brain is the soldier of the soul. Brain is the soldier of our spiritual heart. So that means our soul gives commands to our brain and controls the brain. And the brain gives commands to our physical body. So the mind produces knowledge, comprehension, and consciousness, and thus introduces the world to the spiritual heart. So we have 5 external senses, like a touching, sight, smell, taste, and hearing. These are 5 external senses. But Ghazali says we also have 5 internal senses, which is in the brain, such as thinking, remembering, memory, and imagination. But we also have joint sense perception, which means, we have a sense to unite all the data gathered through different senses. Like, let's say, you are drinking tea, your eyes sees that it is red, your nose gets the smell of the tea, and your hand touches the cup and sees it is hot. And all these things are united through the al-his al-mushtarak, the joint sense perception, and you unite all this data together, and the concept of tea or the image of tea is produced in your brain. So these are called 5 internal senses of the brain. So how does the mind work? So Al-Ghazali compares the operation of a human being with the operation of a state. So he wrote, thus the heart, appoints the eye over the world of colors, hearing over the world of sounds, smell over the world of odors, and so on for the others. These are the bearers of news that they collect from their different worlds and transmit to the imaginative faculty, which is like the master of the couriers. The latter, in turn, delivers them to the storage keeper, which is memory. The storage keeper sets them forth before the king, the heart. So the heart is like the king, who selects therefrom that which he has need of in managing his kingdom, in completing the journey ahead of him, in subjugating his enemy by whom he is afflicted, and in warding off from himself those who cut off his path. So this journey he talks about, like the journey of returning to God, the journey of returning to paradise. So the king, the heart, the spiritual heart, uses imaginative faculty, hearing, eye, smell, memory, like all of these things, to maintain this spiritual journey of reaching to God, reaching to paradise. That's the journey. And the enemy is shaitan and the nafs, the hedonistic self. So the king must fight against these enemies so that they don't stop him from continuing this journey. And he must employ eye, hearing, imaginary fact, and memory, and like all these soldiers. So if the king does this, he is successful, happy, and thankful for the blessings of God the Exalted. So the heart, the soul must successfully manage its army so that he can become successful, happy, and thankful. So what's the soul? Soul is sometimes called ruh, sometimes called qalb, sometimes called aql, and sometimes called nafs, depending on the context. So these terms are sometimes used synonymously, but sometimes they have distinct meanings. For instance, when you say soul, ruh, it means the metaphysical level of human existence. And when you say heart, its special meaning is the central unit in the soul. And intellect means akıl, the power, to perceive things and know them. And the nefs, its special meaning is blameworthy qualities and the animal powers of a human being. So you see, these terms are sometimes used synonymously to mean the ruh, the soul, but sometimes they have their own special meanings. So you have to pay attention to the context to properly understand them. So the human soul belongs to the metaphysical world, alim al-malakut. So it belongs to alim al-ghayb, alim al-amr. The soul is part of the metaphysical world, and thus it can be a subject of empirical study only with respect to its impact on moral qualities, attitudes, and behavioral outcomes. So you can study the soul only by examining its outcomes. You cannot study the essence of the soul. You can study only its manifestations in human qualities, attitudes, and behaviors. Al-Ghazali accepts that there are two souls in human beings. One is the animal soul, which is the source of biological life, and it belongs to the material world. It dies when a human being dies. Biological life ends. But then there is human soul, which is the source of spiritual life, and it belongs to the metaphysical world. It never dies. It survives after you die. Basically, death is the departure of human soul from the physical body. So how is the soul networked with the physical world? So the soul is networked with the physical and metaphysical worlds through reason and the appetitive self, which are linked to the mind. And the mind is linked to the 5 external and internal senses, which mediate between mind and the physical world. So you see that we are all connected to all levels of existence. So Ghazali compares the heart to a king, as I have already mentioned, but this king is contested. So the heart, the soul, is like the ruler in his city and in his kingdom. For the body is the kingdom of the soul. It is world, its abode, and its city. The powers and members of the body occupy the place of craftsmen and laborers. The intelligent reflective power, reason, is like the sincere advisor and intelligent minister. Appetence, nefs or ego or hedonistic self, is like an evil slave, an evil servant, an evil employee who brings food and provisions to the city. Anger and ardor are like the chief of police. The slave who brings the provisions are a liar, a deceiver, an impostor, and a malicious person who plays the part of a sincere advisor, while beneath his advice there is dreadful, evil, and deadly poison. It is his wont and his custom to contend against every plan that the wise minister makes, the intelligence, so that not even for an hour does he cease his contention and opposition to the minister's opinions. So the heart is always contested by nefs. In order, for complete control, the intellect must be vigilant against the tricks and the deception of the nefs. So two conflicting powers of the heart, akıl and nefs. So let's use the Islamic terms, the Arabic terms, rather than their translations because they are like so confusing. The metaphysical soul, the spiritual heart, has two faculties: reason, aql, and the appetitive self, and nafs al-shahwani. Al-Ghazali uses another analogy to describe the conflict between reason and the ego, nafs, that takes place in the heart. The body is like a city, and the mind, reason, is like a king who rules over it. So, aql is like the king to rule the whole body. Its perceptive powers of the senses, both external and internal, are like its armies and helpers. Its members are like the people of the city. The ego, which is appetence and anger, is like the enemy who opposes him in his kingdom and strives to destroy his people. The heart is like a battlefield between those two faculties until the person reaches peace by making reason control all the actions in the scene. Otherwise, there is no peace. There is always conflict, in one's heart. This is the ideal scenario, which may not always work. Orchestrating all the powers in human beings as an army requires self-discipline, an effort which most people lack. They fail to do this, and the anarchy inside continues. Conflict inside continues. The only way to make peace inside, to make the intellect the ruler of our inner world, and put our nafs, hedonistic self, ego, under the control of the intellect. Then there becomes rule of law. Otherwise, rule of desires. So from this perspective, it's accepted that mainly there are three types of self. So the type 1 self, the hedonistic self, nafs ruling the reason. So this is called an-nafs al-ammara because nafs is ruling. Ammar means something or someone which who gives commands. So so this is like ruling appetitive self or the ruling ego, ruling hedonistic self. So that's the lowest state of the heart. And the second type is that there's a conflict between reason and hedonistic self, aql and nafs, and neither one dominates the heart. So that person swings between following his reason and following his nafs. So this is called an-nafs al-lawama, the critical self. So most people are at this level. Sometimes they do good things, sometimes they do bad things, because sometimes they follow their intellect, sometimes they follow their desires. And the type 3 self is called an-nafs al-mutma'inna, the content self, and the ruling power in that type of self is aql, reason. So reason is the ruling power, ruling element in this one. And this self is the actualized self. The potential is actualized. This is human nature. And this is the ideal state of self. But in social sciences, type 1 self is taken as human nature. Although it's an-nafs al-ammara, it is rejected from an Islamic perspective. It needs to be tamed, educated, transformed, and actualized. It is not actualized self. So an-nafs al-ammara, it is what it is. This is how people are, but they should be at the level of the content self. This should be their life goal, to transfer themselves to this level. And actually, the purpose of Islamic education, spiritual education, character education is to elevate the students from type 1 self to type 3 self. But this requires managing the inner conflicts. This is what Imam Ghazali and other Sufi scholars call siyasatul qalb, politics in the heart. Politics in the heart. You have to manage these opposing powers and guide them through these stages from type 1 self to type 3 self. So this is siyasatul qalb. And how do you elevate a person from type 1 self to type 3 self? What are the methods to be used in this process? So scholars, mention several methods: love, service, fellowship, God consciousness, minimalism, and contentment, inner struggle for perfecting deeds. Mahabba, khidma, sohba, dhikr, riyadatun nafs, and mujahada. So these are the methods to be used in elevating a human being from the type 1 self, from the level of nafs al-ammara to type 3 self, which is a nafs al-mutmainna, the content self, the happy self. So when the characteristics of morally trained people reflect moderation, i'tidal, and the characteristic of the people who are not morally trained reflects extremism. They are between two extremes: excess and deficiency. Excess and deficiency, these are vices, moral vices, but moderation is the moral virtue. So Al-Ghazali wrote that when a person achieves a balanced state of 4 faculties of the soul, faculty of knowledge, faculty of anger, faculty of desire, and faculty of justice, which are guided by revelation and reason. See, revelation and reason together. When revelation and reason, work together, then he has perfectly accomplished good character, husnul khuluq al-mutlaqa. So Ghazali accepts that there are 4 faculties: faculty of knowledge, anger, desire, and justice. So nafs ammara is between 2 extremes, either foolishness or deceitfulness, but the moderation is wisdom. The faculty of anger at the level of nafs ammara between 2 extremes, cowardness and aggression. But when it moves to nafs al-mutmainna, it has courage, which is the moderation between cowardliness and aggression. And the same way, faculty of desire, at the level of nafs ammara, it is characterized by one of the 2 extremes, either inertness or debauchery, but the moderation is temperance between the 2. And when it comes to faculty of justice, there are no 2 extremes. There is right and wrong, injustice and justice. So both deficiency and excess is injustice. And the middle ground, the golden middle, the moderation is justice. So these are the 4 fundamental faculties of a human being, and they used to be, they should be used in a moderate way. But nafs ammara always, leads people to the extremes. So this is description in detail, like 2 extremes and the moderation. And the moderation is a feature of the content self and nafs al-mutmainna, which is type 3 self. And the extremes are characteristics of nafs al-ammara. And all these, practical implications, emanate or originate from the type of self one has. There is so much detail. I don't want to take much of your time. So let's move forward. What's human action and how can it be explained? So human action is the intentional performance of an act. Human action is a joint production of soul, mind, and body, three constitutive elements of human being. Human action, according to Muslim scholars, has two levels, external and internal, visible and invisible. The levels of the self, maratib al-nafs, are the key to understand and explain human action, as there is a causal relationship between intentions and actions. So the external level of human action is performed by the body, and it's studied by Fiqh. And the internal level of human action is a performance of the heart, the spiritual heart, and it's studied by tasawwuf. You see that in Islamic civilization, two disciplines have been developed to study human action in a complementary way. Tasawwuf, to study inner, invisible aspect of human action, and Fiqh, to study the external, visible aspect of human action. So this is division of labor, between Fiqh and Tasawwuf. So what is the process through which an action is produced from the perspective of multiplex theory of human action? So the ultimate control center of a human being is the soul, which is also called the heart and the self. Many social theories agree that intentions determine human behavior, especially the idealist theories. They say, intention is the source of human action, but they neglect what motivates the intention. What creates the intention? What's the source of the intentions? Okay, and this is what's studied by Tasawwuf. The heart is the knowing, deciding, and acting human agency. From this multiplex perspective, the heart is the knowing, deciding, and acting human agency. The body and limbs are just tools of the heart. So this is very important. What moves the heart to act are khawatir, ideas emerging in the heart. These are called khawatir. The source of actions are khawatir, writes Al-Ghazali. You see, this is a very different perspective. The origin, the cause of actions are khawatir, the ideas coming to the heart. So the primary agency in the human being is the heart, and heart has khawatir, ideas coming to the heart. And those ideas may come from the body, or may come from nafs, or they may come from shaitan, or they may come from Allah Ta'ala, or they may come from the angels, because our heart is networked, to our physical body, to shaitan, to angels, to Allah Ta'ala. So from all these sources, ideas may come to human heart. These are called khawatir. And these khawatir, if a person takes them seriously and starts thinking about them, then they turn into desire. And desires, if taken seriously, turn into determination, and determination turns into intention, intention turns into will, irada, and the irada turns into human action when it's communicated to the brain and to the physical body. So this is the process through which an action is produced. So depending on the type of the self, human actions gain a shape. So type 1 self produces like purely selfish intentions and actions accordingly. Type 2 self produce sometimes selfish, sometimes otherish intentions, and then It's like sometimes moral, sometimes immoral actions. And then type 3 self, which is ruled by reason, and nafsul mutmainna, purely otherish, altruistic, and always moral actions. So you see how actions originate in this state of the heart. So how are the relations between multiplex self and action constantly reconfigured? So we can make 5 structural observations. First, self is not static. It's fluid, dynamic, and open to change in positive or negative way. Second, the heart is the ultimate decision maker and the control center of the self. It controls the mind and brain, which controls the body. Third, reason and ego, nafs, clash to take control of the heart. Fourth, the conflict between reason and ego determines the state of the heart. Fifth, the state of the heart determines the character of the human being and the quality of human behavior at both visible and invisible levels. So this is kind of summary of what I have been presenting until now. So in conclusion, multiplex human ontology and self offer an alternative model to explain human action based on the following premises. First, human ontology is multiplex. Body, mind, and soul constitute human self. Second, the completion and perfection of a human being take place not only in the mind, but also in the heart and manifest in behaviors. Third, the self is multiplex, ruling appetitive self, critical self, and content self. So don't take the appetitive self as human nature. Fourth, the ideal mental spiritual state is the content self. That's human nature. And nafsul mutmainna is human nature. Type 3 self is human nature, not nafsul ammara. So there are things that are complete and perfect, like nature, and beings that are created to accept perfection, like human beings and society. Fitra means, being created to accept perfection. Istidad, that's the meaning of fitra. It's not mean, being perfect in all aspects. So you have to gain perfection in your actions and ethics and morality. Pure observation of society might not provide proper explanation of social laws and norms, since what is happening in society is not necessarily that ought to be. So that ought to be is something to be gained, through inner struggle, making the reason triumphant in your inner kingdom. This requires a critical engagement with social phenomenon while calling forth a project of regulating the society in order to return what is into what ought to be, perfection of what was not complete and perfect before. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. And thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, comments, objections, contributions, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Professor Şentürk. It has been a very enlightening, full of wisdom and helpful knowledge. This has been very enlightening and informative for me as well. So to me, the whole lecture looks like a methodological explanation of understanding human self from Islamic multiplex ontology or multiplex social theory. Very interesting, very in-depth, and very detailed. So this section, we thank you for this detailed lecture, Professor. We hope our audience have taken notes and is prepared for the question and answer session. So in this section, you can either raise your hand and ask question directly to Professor, or you can put your question to the chat section as well. So I would ask our audience to take advantage of whatever you'd like to. But let me start with this, Professor. You started this lecture with the quest of understanding human self at the very beginning. you started with the kind of Western philosophy or theory of understanding human soul. That very first slide reminds me of the Socrates' famous quote, "Know thyself." So know thyself has been the very beginning and the foundation of a modern, what should I say, the philosophy as well. And there has been another quote of Aristotle. He said once that, "Give me a child until he is 7, I'll give you a man." So this tells me that if there is a proper methodological instruction and procedure a human can follow in an Islamic ontological way, that can take him from type 1 to type 3, right? From nafsul ammara to mutmainna. So, you know, this has been missing in the modern discourse, modern idea of emancipation, and because it doesn't believe in it, right? It believes in liberty, but liberty without responsibility doesn't lead us anywhere. So there are so many things in your lecture that we can actually understand and dissect. So let me start with this: that in the lecture you mentioned about the existence of human soul. I mean, when you talked about the modern part of this discussion, you talked about the body, soul, and mind. And what struck me in my mind is that Descartes' understanding. He acknowledged both mind and body, but the soul part is missing. And could you just elaborate a bit more that how much emphasis is given on soul in Islamic ontology? I mean, can we understand Islamic ontology without existence of soul? Or how much does it occupy in the whole discussion of it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very important, to pay attention to soul as a separate entity in Islamic human ontology, because in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala says that, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, I blowed in the human beings, from my ruh, from my soul. So it should be properly understood. First, Allah Ta'ala doesn't have ruh. Yani he's not like us, Allah Ta'ala doesn't have body and soul, so he created the ruh, and he gave this ruh to human beings. When he says my soul, it means the soul that belongs to me, the soul that I created. So he created this special entity he called ruh, and he gave this soul to human beings, which is something very special. And that special ruh is not given to other creatures, only to human beings, which made it very special. أحسن تقويم, يعني the best of the creation, and the consequence of this is that he is appointed as Khalifatullah, the vicegerent of Allah on the earth, because he is the most perfect creation of Allah Ta'ala. So human beings are honored, by this special soul given to them by Allah Ta'ala. So that's why it's very important, to pay attention to human soul, and also this is very important for the human journey. I mean, like the body is created from dust, from soil, and it belongs to the physical world. And when a human being dies, the body decomposes, but what continues is this metaphysical entity, the soul. I mean, one's soul continues to survive. It does not die when the body dies. So you have to take into consideration the human soul in order to explain this human journey, coming from the metaphysical world, living temporarily in this world, and also going back, to this metaphysical world once again. So without talking about the soul, you can never understand Islamic conception of human self, and the Islamic understanding of human creation and human journey. And those people, like those evolutionists, they focus only on human body, and they try to explain that human beings are created through evolution, etc. But this is just a reductionist perspective, looking only at the human physical body. But this is not what makes us human beings. What makes us human beings is the soul. So you have to understand that what makes a human being is the soul, but not the body. So that's why it's very important, to separate soul from mind and from body, and have this multiplex understanding of the concept of self. And this has a lot of deep and radical ramifications on our social theory. When you talk about economics, politics, sociology, anthropology, psychology, when you accept this concept of human, like multiplex human ontology, everything changes. In social theory, psychological theory, economic theory, political theory, everything changes. So this is like a very, how should I say, key point. But those modern and postmodern theorists in social science and humanities, they'll always keep it in the background, keep it in hiding. Why? Because they don't have a solid concept of human being which they can defend. When they open it to discussion, they can easily be refuted. That's why they don't want to talk about it. Yes, I think this is sufficient as an answer to your question.
Yeah, we're hoping to have more questions. Actually, one of our audience, actually, Nahid mentioned that I guess we hear a lot about sixth sense, and you haven't mentioned anything about it. So, what is sixth sense in modern world, and how can we understand it in compared to the Islamic ontology that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people, add up new senses. They say we don't have 5 senses only, we have 6 sense, 5th sense, 7th sense. See what I mean? So they increase, but this is the commonly shared understanding of our like physical senses and also the mental senses. One can increase them. This is not the essential point of what I am trying to argue for. What I'm trying to argue is this multiplex human ontology, that we have body with physical senses, we have mind with mental senses, and then we have the soul. So this is my major argument. So the number of senses is not really the essential point that I'm trying to make. But one should be aware that people make claims that we have like a 6, 7, 8 senses, depending on their perspective. So, I mean, there are arguments like this as well, but it does not have any effect, on my argument of multiplexity.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Nahid, go ahead, unmute yourself, please, and make your question.
Oh, Professor, I just wanted to say to that, the sixth sense idea, you gave the example of a cup of tea. You can see it, you can feel it. But sometimes something is right or something is wrong. Women are always told to use their sixth sense before they go into a place that might be dangerous for them. And I'm sure men also have that feeling as well. And animals know when there is a danger. You might not see the danger, but you can sense the danger. So it's about how to keep yourself safe. So I was talking more about that sense. It's not a material thing, but you can feel that something is right or not, safe or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some people call this like a sixth sense, but some people don't call it sense. They call it intuition. I mean, you intuitively, know it without any empirical or rational evidence for it. Like some voice inside of you, tells you, oh, this is the right thing to do, or there is danger, but you have no rational or empirical proof for it. It's an intuition, in your heart or in your mind. So some people call it sense, some people don't call it sense. I mean, it's up to you to call it sense or not. And it's true, some people have this intuitive power, to feel things, but if you tell them to explain and prove it, they cannot do it. But they have this kind of,
But in the material world, we're told that.
Yes, yeah, I agree with this.
Sorry, I just want to say in the if we're living in the material world, that we you can explain everything on the material level.
Mhm.
So in that sense, there will be some, you might not know how to explain it, but metaphysics is still part of the material world.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we cannot separate physical world from the metaphysical world. You cannot separate your intuitions from your senses. That's the whole argument of multiplexity. You have to have this holistic perspective to integrate and unite them together. I mean, modern and postmodern perspective, separates these things and creates false dichotomies. We have to emancipate our thinking from these false dichotomies and pseudo dualities. And this is what I call decolonizing social sciences, decolonizing our minds and thinking. We have to have a holistic, more comprehensive approach to ourselves that would integrate all these things without neglecting any of it.
Okay, thank you, Professor and Nahid, for your question. One question in the chat, Mac Wasilat, if I say it correctly, says that said to you, Professor, that you seem to have formulated this idea of multiple human ontology based on Al-Ghazali's concept and concept of Said Nursi. So, I mean, what is the difference between these between their arguments? I mean, what do you see? How much you have taken?
No, they are the same, because all Muslim scholars, they share this perspective. It's not something Ghazali invented. It's not something Nursi invented. Like, I can come up with 1,000 examples, from other sources, from Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, from Ibn Sina, Farabi, Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi, I mean, from later scholars, all of them share this view. But I chose Ghazali because he's well known, and also his book on the heart is translated to English so that people can use it as a reference, to check, the arguments I am making. So all Muslim scholars share this, and there's consensus that we have body, we have mind, we have soul, and in the soul we have aql and nafs. So this is something commonly shared, and it is grounded in the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ. So they systematized this and explained in greater detail in their works. But none of them is the innovator of this concept of self, and I'm not also innovator of this concept of self. This is not my idea. This is rooted revival at Tajdid al-Muwassal. So basically, I'm trying to revive what we inherit, from our scholars, in our intellectual and spiritual history. and bring it to today's discourse, and in a comparative way, comparing it with the modern and postmodern idealist and materialist views, you know, embedded in that context, so that it makes more sense to the present audience.
Excellent, Professor. Mutir Rahman mentioned, made a rather interesting comment. He said that with regard to soul, what he said is that in its purest form, a soul is called ruh, but when it is attached to being, like with a human, it is called a nafs. What's your comment on it?
Yeah, sometimes it's used like this. You know, I mean, these concepts have like different meanings in different contexts. You know, like kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut, for instance. You know, like every living being, you know, will taste death. So you know, it's a different concept. Ya ayyuhan nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah is another nafs. So I mean, لا أبرئ نفسي إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء. You know, like you have to take into consideration the context, because these concepts are used with different meanings in different contexts. So you have to, you cannot say, well, this is the meaning of nafs in everywhere. See what I mean? And sometimes it's used with this meaning, that it is, you know, connected with the human body. And this is called nafs shahwani, the nafs that has desires and appetites.
That's good. Mutir Rahman, do you like to add more to it, you think?
Jazakallah. No, I thought that was my assumption. Jazakallah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay. I hope there is not that much questions, but one important point, Professor, from me is that you mentioned 3 stages of human life. The stages are type 1, 2, and 3. And in human history, especially the history of Islam, there are many methodologies we have seen in our history to go from stage 1 to stage 3, right? And that is the human goal, actually, to progress to that level. And if you look at the human history as a whole, it looks like the humans are in a journey, right? We are in a journey, and our aim, our goal is to go from type 1 to type 3. So there are so many methodologies in that process, and Sufism you mentioned is one of that. So in a modern world that we live in, what could be the methodology that we should be following? I mean, what do you recommend? I mean, I understand that it requires a detailed lecture series by itself, but in a nutshell, what do you think?
Yeah, same methodology, you know. I mean, you know, muhabba, love, you know, loving the whole creation, you know, loving Allah Ta'ala, loving His creation, selfless love, you know, and also serving the whole creation. You know, these purify, you know, human self, and also making zikr of Allah Ta'ala, and also limiting your consumption, you know, making riyada, you know, being a minimalist, rather than, you know, running after like having extra pleasures, you know. So like the same methods today, we have to apply them to elevate ourselves, you know, from type 1 to type 3 self, inshallah ta'ala, from nafs al-ammara to nafs al-mutma'inna. And of course, you need some kind of help and guidance to be able to do these things properly.
Thank you so much. There's a last question. We have a hand over here, Rubayat Yamin. Could you unmute yourself and make the question, please, Rubayat?
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Recep. I'm Rubayat Yamin. I'm from Oakville, Canada, and I studied biochemistry, biotechnology. I'm in the life sciences. So my question is, some people, they would they would say that the consciousness and mind and these things, people who are coming from a physicalist perspective, they're going to say that these are just emergent phenomena of the biological, the network, like how the brain is connected together, and basically it's an emergent phenomenon from the physical aspect of the brain. How do you refute this kind of
No, we
idea?
don't need to refute it. I agree with them.
Okay.
I mean,
how do you deal?
The dimag is the brain. Dimag is the brain, and zihin is the functions of the brain. And it is subject to empirical study. So I agree with them with this respect. The only thing I disagree with them, the connection of the mind to the soul.
Okay.
This is what they are missing. So they think the brain is the ultimate control center, but there is something about the brain which we call ruh or qalb. So this is what they are missing. Other than that, they're not wrong in many things that they are saying, but they are wrong in their reductionism. Yeah. So actually, multiplexity incorporates the empirical study, but rejects the reductionism that everything is empirical. I mean, empirical study is sufficient for us to understand human life and human action. So we accept there is like a physical level of human existence. That means, we commonly share this perspective with those materialists and physicalists. The only disagreement between us is their reductionism. Because they are reductionists, they try to reduce everything to the material level, all these chemical interactions and the nerve system and everything. But we accept that there is something about the brain which controls the brain as well. So brain is not autonomous. There is something about the brain. But many of the empirical work they are doing makes sense. The only problem they have is this reductionism.
So my question was more regarding that reductionism, right? Like, so how do we, so the way I would, I would argue for the ontological existence of the mind and the ruh and all that would be to first basically use pure rational arguments to establish the existence of a creator, which is a physical, a created phenomena. Well, not phenomena. We can't call Allah phenomena, but Allah is there. And then we sort of use pure rationality to sort of prove the reality of the Quran. And then from there we establish the ontology of the ruh and the mind and things. So I understood that this is the only way in my weak mind that I knew that this is the way to do it. Is there a way where people who are being stubborn, for example, about not accepting that, they don't want to admit the revelation, is there any other route to reach the reality of the soul and mind, the mind that's the physical, the heart that we were talking about, the qalb? Is there any other route from the empirical to show them that that exists? You can see it from other.
I mean, like, we all have like a same physical structure, same brain, but why do we act in different ways? That's the question. I mean, like your brain, my brain is the same. I mean, like the brain of your friends is the same, but why do you act in different ways? So this is the answer for this, because our qalb, or the state of our qalb, nafs ammara, nafs mutmainna, or nafs lawwama, is the origin of why we act in different ways. I mean, the hardware is the same, but there's a software kind of, if you make a comparison, the software, which is the ruh, and the state of the ruh, and the conflict between the state of the conflict between aql and nafs, This is what makes us act in different ways. Otherwise, we would act the same way. You know, if you rely only the brain, because our brains is the same, you know, and we live in like the same social environment. So the only explanation why, you know, we act in different ways in the practical life, you know, is the soul. So basically, you are making reverse engineering.
Okay.
Looking at the manifestation and using this manifestation as an evidence for the existence of the source, which is the ruh, because ruh itself is not observable. You cannot empirically prove it, but you can study its manifestations, ramifications to prove its existence. And many things like in life, we don't see, but we accept that they exist by looking at their manifestations. Like we have many waves on the air, which we don't see, right? But radio waves, internet, etc., you know, like wireless internet, you know, we accept their existence by looking at their consequences, you know, their manifestations, their outcomes. Same thing for ruh. You know, I mean, we cannot see ruh, but we look at its manifestations and then judge that it exists. And if you don't take this into account, there is no way to explain why we act in different ways in our practical life. Like why one is selfish, the other is not selfish. You know, why one prays, the other does not pray. You know, why one, you know, makes sacrifice, the other does not make sacrifice. What's the origin of it? You have the same brain, same nerve system, same chemical functions, you know, but acting in different ways. So this would be my approach for it.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you,
You're
Rubaiyat,
welcome.
as well. I mean, I'm not sure whether you have joined in our claims lecture group, Rubaiyat. Please, if not, please do so. You'll be able to share your other questions and you know, queries there. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today, and we need to finish it off because it is getting late for Professor and here as well. So we thank you everyone for making comments, and especially thanks to Nahid and for being the co-host tonight. Our next lecture will be on 20th June, Monday, on the topic of studying human action, Fiqh and Tasawwuf. So tonight we thank Professor Dr. Recep Şentürk for delivering the lecture. We thank you all for being with us and taking part and making valuable contributions to the discussion. We are very much looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture as well. With that, we are closing our lecture tonight. We'll see you at the next lecture. Bye for now.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.